Hello and welcome to the Field Engineer channel. If you're new here, my name is Guy, and on this channel we discuss topics of interest to field engineers and field managers. Today we're holding a round table with managers. I have with me Kevin Mace, Jerry Varvaro, Paul Camidge, and Charlie Apps. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm happy to have you with us today and taking the time to share our experiences with the community. So I guess we can get started. And the topic that we chose for today, at least to start with, is the current job market. We are in different continents, different countries, and we're seeing similarities on the job market. So Jerome, since you are in the US, what is the reality in the US today for the job market?
Well, we've seen a contraction in the job market, and in my industry, which is biopharma, we've seen since the COVID cliff, we call it, right? Where the business was growing exponentially, and then we saw a tremendous downturn. We've seen a lot of startup companies go away. We've seen a pullback in production capacities, and we know there's been a significant amount of layoffs in the biopharma space. So from what my recruiting people are telling me and my managers, the amount of resumes they're getting in has increased dramatically. So there's no shortage of candidates at the moment, which, it's a little bit telling of what's going on in the market. We're very cautious about hiring, but we are hiring because, we know there's a lot of uncertainty in our market. So that kind of translates to opportunities. We're a little bit more cautious about strategic growth. We're only really focusing on operational growth as required at the moment. So a little bit of a different dynamic for me in the biopharma that it's been over the past decade or so.
Interesting. Thank you, Jerry. Kevin, you are in Europe. If I'm not mistaken, you are based out of Switzerland. What are you seeing nowadays compared to maybe pre-COVID and a few years ago?
Yeah, it's very similar to Jerome there. It comes in peaks and waves. Post-COVID, we saw a slowdown in business, and then supply chain issues that followed that as well. We had to scramble to catch up. So we went through a wave of hiring very, very quickly to plug some gaps once we started getting all the manufacturing back online again. And then kind of we got through that peak, and then you come down the other side and business slowed down a little bit more, and then you have to kind of put the brakes on hiring as well. So we see these waves coming of hiring and then slowing down. Most businesses these days are operating under really tight financial constraints, which is another element of, the restriction on the hiring process as well. And then when you throw things like AI into the mix as well now, and everyone's trying to figure out how do you fit AI into your business and what does that mean for the workforce, and you're trying to balance that. Again, it's another kind of hurdle you have to jump over to even justify creating a position now or replacing a position. It becomes a lot tougher these days when we have so many more technological advancements and new tools and new features that can potentially do things faster than humans. It really makes recruiting quite difficult these days, I think.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thanks, Kevin. How is the reality on your side, Paul? And by the way, Paul is based out of the UK.
I think it's interesting I totally agree with what everybody else has said. The thing that I find fascinating is it depends where you are in the hiring market. Having recently attempted to did recruit in 2 rounds of field service engineers, they are really challenging to get applications. I was expecting to be inundated, but we weren't. And that begs the question, where are all the great field service engineers and why are they not applying? As you go into different areas, if you're trying to recruit managers, that gets more difficult. But I always get slightly frustrated when AI gets brought up here, because I think within lots of large organizations, particularly if you work for a big organization, it's not just the ones I work for, but the ones I talk to at other industry group meetings, there is this assumption from people who don't really understand that, we'll all be able to do it by AI. And I'm always reminded of that clip in Skyfall where Bond is talking to M in front of it's a Wainwright, isn't it, picture? And Bond says something along the lines of, you always will need somebody to pull the trigger or not. Fundamentally, field service requires a person to go somewhere and do something. AI will never replace that. but we seem to assume that somehow it will. And so, as you say, Kevin, totally agree. The hoops we are having to now jump through to justify the fact that we need a person to go somewhere with a toolkit. Something which I found over my course of being in service management has changed immensely. We could always rely on people knowing, yeah, we used to have to justify it financially, but we could always know that there was always going to be a need for it. But now I'm not sure. We're now justifying the very essence of field service.
Yeah, interesting point you made about AI also, and I think the bubble is growing and it's causing misunderstandings across the board. I just want to mention to our audience that it happens that all of us are in the medical devices field, but whatever we are seeing applies also across the whole market. In my case and in Charlie's case, we have been out of the job for a few months now. Charlie, I'll let you start with maybe sharing with the audience what has been your experience as a job hunter.
Okay, so I think one thing that's true when you're looking for jobs is you're very aware of the large layoffs, and I think that's been particularly visible on various platforms. If you spend any time on LinkedIn, you'll see large organizations doing some significant layoffs. There are hashtag 5,000 to the the people affected by a large layoff fairly recently in Europe. I think just in terms of the job market, I noticed a couple of years ago, I was speaking with startups, and there was a distinct lack of investment around about the 2023, 2024 time. And I think that is probably now, that situation is improving. And so there are opportunities in startups, which then feed through into larger organizations as they mature and become more interesting in terms of acquisition. But I think it's interesting from the point of view of field service engineers. I mean, Paul made the point, trying to recruit a field service engineer and not being inundated. It's interesting where the layoffs have happened in the last year or so. I suspect because field service is an essential task, you are tied to service contracts. I suspect people are very reluctant to cut at the coalface. And so a lot of those layoffs that we've seen have been in jobs that aren't customer facing and right at the point that you're generating and generating revenue and delivering for your customers. From my perspective, I mean, job hunting is tough. I haven't had to do it for a very long time, and life is now very different from when I was last looking for a job. And I think it's a challenging environment. I've had lots of interesting conversations. The work here that I do with the field engineer is as a result of having some of those conversations, and I very much enjoy being involved in the field engineer. I've done some mentoring. As you know, I put some of these videos together. I occasionally do some of the interviews as well. So that's great. But it'd be great to get something that is a little bit more full time for me. So what about your experience, Guy?
Thank you for sharing, Charlie. I've been on the market actively this year, but I quit my job a year and a half ago. At the time, maybe 2 years ago, I had 2 open positions in Canada, and one of them was in Toronto, one in Montreal. And I can tell you, in total, I received maybe 150 resumes. Only less than 10% were relevant. So back to the point of talent, it wasn't there, unfortunately. And out of the 10%, after interviewing people, it came down to 1 or 2 people for the position in Montreal, and then 1 or 2 for the position in Toronto. Few years ago, before the pandemic, it was different. I was receiving less resumes, but they were all relevant. And I had a big, pool of people, talented people to choose from. As for a job hunter for myself, I used to receive tags from recruiters asking me if I'm interested because they have an opportunity. That is not happening. It has not happened for me more than 2 or 3 years ago. So we're going back to the pandemic time. And I think the market changed tremendously. During the pandemic, it was an employee market, meaning that employees were having solid employment. They were kind of imposing their own rules on the job. Now the table has turned and it's more the employers, and they have now kind of luxury of deciding what happens with employees, whether they open a position or not, or whether they downsize or not. As for job hunting, what I've been seeing is whatever I find an opportunity that I apply to, I don't hear back from companies. Last week, I heard back from a company where I applied a year ago. So I don't know if HR is overwhelmed because maybe companies downsized even in that department, and they're overwhelmed with managing their applicant tracking system and responding back. I've had a few interviews, but they did not get me anywhere. And I wonder, I don't know if you see this, but I wonder if ageism, and I'll say it out loudly, if ageism is a component with employers nowadays. What have you seen in your experience when you have an open position and you are interviewing, people from different walks of the earth and different ages? What have you seen about that aspect specifically? Maybe we can start with you, Kevin, again.
I think I just want to pick up on the talent and recruitment side of things. Like you say, we see it as well. There's an overwhelming volume of applications for every job, but the majority of them most of the time aren't relevant necessarily for that job. It's people trying their luck. And I get the feeling these days, at least in my experience, the talent acquisition teams are completely overwhelmed with the sheer volume that they have to go through. And it's difficult to find the right candidates. So, and the talent team can't spend enough time researching and finding the right person because of the sheer volume that they have to go through for each single position. And most companies, I think, don't have that many recruiters to cope. Certainly in larger companies now, you've got 40 or 50,000 people in the company, that there's just not enough recruiters to do the right level of due diligence on the applicants. So I think that's one area we're struggling. And then I think with the different generations in the workforce as well now, I think ageism is a relevant topic. There's different, we're all used, we all grew up with boomers and Gen X, and then now we have millennial managers, and very soon we'll have Gen Z managers, and every generation has a different attitude to how they approach work and the people they hire and everything else. So I'm a big proponent of I think we should have generational training in the workplace. Like how do I differentiate managing between a Gen Z person and a millennial and a Gen X? Because you have to approach it differently. And I see it now with some of my younger team members. If they're not satisfied with the work and they don't find value, they'll just move on to something else. Whereas our generation is more, this is a job for life or a long-term career, and you plan your growth. So I think the workforce is changing as well now, and that's having an impact on hiring and certainly career progression as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kevin. Jerry?
Yeah, I think, the topic of ageism is interesting. It's a subconscious bias, that any manager has regarding a candidate for a variety of reasons. And the company really works hard to overcome that. We've hired a lot of more senior people. And I think to Kevin's point, there is a difference, a generational difference in how you deal with people, and people have different motivators. They come with different perspectives. That's a certainty, right? But certainly, there's no aversion to hiring older individuals. There are people we've hired who are re-entering the job market, quite senior. And it's just a fountain of knowledge, people that usually can hit the ground running because they've been there, done that. They have a lot of experience. So there's actually an attraction to it. But I also like to say, too, just with the dynamic in the job market, I mean, what's going on in the U.S., it's the most uncertain place in the world based on certain people making decisions around here. But Yeah, we see also a lack of movement in the job market. Where you had people moving, not that they've lost a job, but they're moving between opportunities. People tend to stay in place. So that does or had been affecting the candidate pool. There weren't a lot of people willing to move and take risks because there is so much uncertainty, which also then makes us look at our career development activities, because we know at some point maybe those floodgates open up, and are we sitting on a powder keg where we have a group of individuals in our organization that may look to leave when things start to the outlook starts to improve. So there's a lot of work we need to do now to prepare for that, with engagement in career development and career journeys for the service team.
Yeah, making sense. Paul, what has been your experience?
It is very interesting, isn't it? I mean, first of all, I'm going to come back to something you said a minute ago, Guy, about the fact that it's an employer market. And then I would challenge us all to go to LinkedIn and see every single company highlighting all the things that they do for their employees. And on first pass, they advertise it as, why would you want to come and work for X, whoever? The reality is that it isn't. It's therefore to try and make sure that their own staff don't leave. And this really then, I think, really, to come back to your point, Jerry, is really important, because if we start basing the entire reason for somebody to stay in a job on what they're getting, the transactional nature of your employment becomes very, very based on just what am I getting. And so you're absolutely right. The second somebody offers them something else, they've gone, because they don't feel that same loyalty. Ageism, I do think it does exist. And sorry, I'm going to have a go at the Americans now for a second. This is, let's face it, from American TV. When was the last time you saw with the exception of, George Clooney and people like that, people of a certain age in senior positions, they are all phenomenally attractive younger people in these very, very senior vice president and president positions. So the whole market, and obviously, the US TV market and film market spends billions on marketing. So how on earth can we, as mere mortals, compete against that? And the truth is we can't. The one thing I would, though, remind us all is thinking about our parents, is that if we think about our ages now, when our parents were our age, how many of our parents were retired at the age that we are now? And yet I'm thinking, well, I'm not ready to retire. I'm not thinking I'm going to retire in the next couple of years. Yet my dad was retired by the time he was my age. And so we are seeing a generational change. And I wonder the reason why we are experiencing it differently, we are railing against it, saying, oh, this is aging, is because it's the first time it's ever happened. It's the first time that the older, let's be honest and call it older, because that's what it is, are saying, I don't want to go. I don't want to work in my garden shed making, growing tomatoes or whatever. I want to stay working. I want to stay working at this high level. And I don't know how much of it is us and how much of it is the next generation saying, move over, it's our turn now.
Yeah,
I think you have to balance that. There's a compound effect going on here as well, isn't it? People are living longer, everything's more expensive, so you have to work longer, which keeps older people in the workplace, preventing younger people coming in as well. And this all kind of compounds on top of financial constraints and geopolitics and everything else, right? It makes it a really hard environment. I don't think there really is such a thing as a job for life anymore, like there used to be. You used to join a company as a service engineer and you'd stay until you retired. I think those days are gone now, and the younger generations want different things. They want to enjoy their life, right? Whereas we grew up expecting, this is my job for life, I'll do it till I retire, and then I'll go and grow my tomatoes in my shed.
But they're also being told that they should expect that.
Yeah.
You should expect your employer to fall over, to give you bean bags and free coffee and goodness knows whatever. And the outliers like Google and what have you that do all of these funky things for their staff are sort of giving the workforce an unfair idea of what work is. And so I'm a bit worried. Some people come into the market and they think, well, where's my bean bag and where's my free coffee and where's this and where's that? And the reality is, well, they were never there. Sorry. You essentially have believed a myth. it's only a certain number of companies in certain sectors that have these kind of things. So I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. But I think it's a two-way thing. One is people are expecting it, but also they're being told to expect it. Then there isn't that older generation, perhaps, in the workforce as when I started as an apprentice, to saying, look, you're young, you're inexperienced, this is the way things have got to be done, and you nod your head and you do it. And then when you're a bit older, you realise that they were complete idiots and they were talking rubbish or whatever. And it is it's a very different job market now than it was when we entered it. I guess we're all, with the exception perhaps of Charlie, similar age. But I wonder, was
Very
it any
kind.
different?
Thanks, Paul.
Young Charlie.
Young Charlie.
So, young Charlie, what is your experience with that?
My impression as the youngster here is that actually we're in a phase where there is a lot less churn than we would expect. But I think Paul's hit upon some interesting structural issues where, perhaps a slightly older generation are wanting to stick with their jobs, and that clogs up the system a little bit. But I still think just with the kind of macroeconomics that there are, there is, people are worried about moving, taking a risk, leaving a safe job because their opportunities are, they may be there, but it's hugely competitive, and you've got this flurry of people trying their luck and chancing an application. The thing I'm struggling to get my head around is I too have seen from the outside huge applications that are not relevant, and I guess it's quite easy to filter out some of those, but how much is how much of that large volume is actually quality, and how much is just rubbish? I don't know. I don't have a sense of, if there's 1,000 applications for a job, whether it's 900 that are just easily to slice away.
Sadly,
so I think
yes.
Yeah. When I was hiring, it was very easy to see, okay, you're not even qualified or allowed to work in the particular environment or state that we require. So those are very easy to sift through and sort out. But you've got to do legwork. So yeah, I think it's coming to the ageism bit. Still, I'm the youngest here, sure, but I still feel like I have been tempted to just adjust my online profile to knock away some of my early jobs, just to make me seem the other side of the latest decade I've gone through. So I get there's a temptation, but the reality is when you come to do an application, your years of study are there. An application may not want your date of birth, but it's pretty clear that when did you graduate, or when did you complete your training? Okay, well there you go. And so baked into any application is some kind, there is an age, you can discriminate on age. I think that being said, you can discriminate on a lot of things, and a lot of discrimination happens. And I think I can't sit here and complain too much about it, because I have to show my value in other ways. And I think some of the advice that I have received is actually your best opportunities for getting a job is through your network, through the people who know you. And like you, Guy, I've put in lots of applications, cold applications, where the people don't know me, and I've fallen foul of something that some box I haven't checked, and that's fine. And so my approach is much more along lines of approaching my network, seeing through opportunities, and I think that's going to be much more fruitful for anyone who's in the job market. Work your network.
I agree, and I've seen the same. Going through your network is a more sure way. Cold applying, you have a very slim chance of being looked at. And as Kevin said earlier, it could be because of the volume of applications, and companies are using the applicant tracking systems in different ways. We always had applicant tracking systems, but now it has become a buzzword, as if it is the AI that is deciding for the company. And I don't think it is. Maybe in some instances, it does the first triage, maybe, looking for keywords, looking for specific aspects of the resume. But as a hiring manager, I mentioned 150 resumes earlier. I went through them one by one, like the old days, printed on paper with my notes and classifying them top 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. But I don't know what other companies are doing. So what I'm seeing also is that the job hunters are countering that with AI. We talked about AI earlier, we mentioned it. So if the ATS has its own AI to select candidates based on keywords, well, now employees or job hunters have at their disposal ChatGPT and Copilot and all the other known AIs to help them build a resume based on the job description, even though, and this is where the mistake is happening, even though they do not possess these skills necessarily. And when they reach the interview, this is where they falter. And companies are now being very careful, and it's making the job market even more complex. So going through the network is very helpful to maybe put aside the ATS and the AI and get the job hunter in front of the decision makers, because he or she comes recommended from someone in the organization. And most organizations have the kind of reward where if that person who was referred is employed and stays for the first 6 months, the person who referred that employee gets a kind of reward. And this is happening in different areas of the world, not only for employment, but even in my building here for, decide on who's your next neighbor. Because if you refer someone and they rent the apartment here, then you get 500% discount on your rent. So that network is really important, and especially in the employment area. How is that working for you, Kevin, as for referrals and even the ATS? How are you seeing that dynamics working?
Yeah, I mean, the referral, we have that internally in the company here as well. There's a cash bonus if you refer somebody and they start and finish their probation, then there's a cash reward for that. So that's something, I mean, I've been here almost 25 years and we've used that pretty heavily over time, because ultimately it helps cut your costs. The recruiting costs are particularly expensive. So it's a big, it's a win for the company. It's a win for the internal person that refers as well. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I think networking is so powerful. The wider your network of people already in the industry you want to get into, then it should make it easier for them to make introductions for you, or at least get you past the first stage of the recruiting process, right? Bypass the AI tool and speak to a recruiter. It definitely helps. And we've used that a number of times here to try and get the right people in faster than we would have done otherwise. I don't remember the last person I hired in the UK. I don't hire so often these days, but the last person I hired was in the UK. And there was about 200 applicants for that. And it was a senior position, senior director level position. There was about 200 applications for that job. And I would say probably 90% of them were from outside of the UK on that one. So it was very difficult to whittle it down to get the right candidates in.
Right. In my experience, referral puts you on the top of the pile. You would be looked at first before the other applicants. How was it for you, Jerry?
Well, same thing. We've had an employee incentive program, which is quite significant. If you refer someone and, once they get past their 6-month period, then there's a nice little payout. And I can say that over the last few years, a significant portion of our field service team has come from referrals, family members. And you're right, they go right to the top of the list. And you tend to focus on them because they're a known quantity, especially if the person referring them is of a certain type and you say, well, okay, chances are they're not going to recommend somebody totally alien. This is somebody who's probably steadfast and reliable. So yeah, it makes a big difference. And or from other colleagues in societies like this, you take referrals, and I think it's very important as a door opener. So the manager, we have, a system where you have a funnel of resumes that come in and you go through and you have to just click, move on to the next screening, or, you kick them out, and you just, So there's ways to kind of process the information faster than there were in the past. Versus I used to be like, you print them out, sit there with a highlighter, and but now it's all done. And we use Workday, which I'm sure a lot of people use as a tool to kind of manage the intake. We don't use external recruiters much anymore. We're always relying on our internal recruiting team, which is interesting, and that may be more cost based as well, right? To try to use our internal resources to do screenings and things like that. But it's interesting though, just step back a second, looking at the field service engineering team, how many young people have come in, because we're out there recruiting at colleges around the country. And we're getting a lot of people with engineering degrees becoming field service engineers, men and women, and they enjoy it. Because I think Kevin mentioned the workforce is changing, right? And we see in the US there's a lot of I guess the movement for younger people to focus on work-life balance and more focused on living life versus dedicating to a career. People leaving their careers very early on to pursue some dream, right? But we've had a lot of younger people come into the field service engineering ranks who find it freeing and very different, right? You're very, much self-sufficient. You get to travel quite a bit. We're an international company, so people get to travel to Europe quite a bit for trainings, and it's actually been a draw for younger people where that probably didn't exist in the past. And maybe it kind of fits that drive to kind of, have more life experiences, right? Than purely just focusing on a career. We can do both in field service in some ways, right?
Right, yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Paul?
Interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think we've all hit the same word, is that recruiting is very, very expensive for companies, which is why since the dawn of time, we as individuals, if we've got to spend all of this money getting somebody on board, we wanted to make sure that money is spent wisely. In the previous years, it might be some kind of dodgy network. Now it is LinkedIn or it's industry groups, etc., etc. And so because it gives us a level of confidence. So you're absolutely right, Guy, when you said, flex your network, because that's what's going to work for obvious reasons. I do think there's an irony here that we are using AI to generate our CVs now because it's easier, which then gets sent to a company that uses AI to decipher the same thing. So essentially, we've got two AIs talking to each other to generate keywords. Now, I'm not the most competent person with AI. I don't really understand it anywhere near as much, but that sounds to me like we are just generating pointless keywords when there must be a better way to do this. And just coming back to the one thing, I mean, we are being inundated with inappropriate applications. I mean, Kevin, you mentioned about the UK. I had exactly the same challenge in the UK, where 90% of the applicants didn't have a right to work in the UK, which is something which was on the job description, say, please don't apply if you don't have a right to work. It's fairly obvious. It's the easy apply button. I mean, it's so easy to hit that button, autofill a resume or a CV, as we like to call it in English, and hit send. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you chance your arm if it takes you 30 seconds to put a CV together? And therein lies the problem. You're right, Guy. 20, 30 years ago, we got 20 CVs, of which you really had a struggle to whittle it down to 5, because you thought, oh, well, yes, they've got this and they've got this. Now you've got 150 CVs, but you whittle it down to 2 immediately. And then when you go to interview, one of them doesn't turn up. Or in one of the very embarrassing times I had, nobody turned up. Everybody either didn't just show or cancelled on the day.
Wow.
And I think some of this is, again, companies get wind of people going for jobs and they offer them money to stay, or they offer them something else to stay. I don't think it's that mercenary of the individual. If they were in their shoes, I guess I'd do the same. But companies are so worried about losing good members of staff, they will throw money at them to try and keep them to stay. Now, I think it's a short-termism, because I think it will eventually backfire. But when you're sitting in the room, suited and booted, waiting for your candidates, it's a little embarrassing and a bit soul searching when you're thinking, goodness me, what have we done wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Charlie, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I was just going to pick up on Paul's point of the easy apply, and I think it's a real double-edged sword. Like, you don't want too much friction to have a good pool of candidates, so you want to make it easy to get in, to attract people. But the problem with that is that you attract lots of people that from the application side. It's soul destroying when you come across another work day where you have to do another login and fill in the same information. And yes, you can have form filling and have a lot of it automated. But it does feel like the process is slightly broken. Either it's too easy, or it's a lot of effort for what you think is probably going to be, no word, or in best case, rejection. Well, best case, obviously interview, but in a lot of cases, rejection, or you're not going to hear anything back. So I think in the current market, I get why you want to have a little bit of friction. Make people work for those who really want to be there, to get rid of the fluff. But I think when times are a little bit more tough, where it's more of an applications market rather than a buyer's market, then I think you have to adjust your talent acquisition strategy to reflect that. So I get it. You want people to apply, but you don't want to have waste all that time and not have any people to interview at the end of it.
We talked about ageism a minute ago, but I think unfortunately, and you're absolutely right, Charlie. I mean, please don't let me think I'm saying the easy apply button is a bad thing. It's not. It's a great thing, but it has the laws of unintended consequences. And another unintended consequence is the move towards more automated, the more online, does discriminate against people who are not as good. And let's be honest, the younger generations are far better at this than we are. One of the most pernicious ones that I really dislike, there are a number of companies who are doing video interviews now, where you have to record your answers to a set of questions as part of the interview process. Now, I would find that really, really challenging. Yet I've spent decades presenting on large stages. That doesn't worry me. My daughter, who records TikTok videos and what have you all the time, would find that really, really easy. So then the unintended consequences, we are baking in a bias towards a younger member of staff who will inevitably come across better on the platforms that are being used. Now, I don't think that was ever intended. I don't think companies have deliberately said, oh, let's use a recruitment process which inherently biases against older, less technological people. But that is the unintended consequence, perhaps, of some of the things that they are doing. I dare say some of my applications for jobs weren't exactly great because I didn't understand the best way of doing it in the new format. And so if you're being reviewed by a person that's used to looking at it, they'll reject irrespective of what your skills are.
Yeah. It's a very good point.
We might be getting shorter on time, and maybe some managers have to leave in 10 minutes, but maybe I'll add a point for discussion. Now that we hired the right people, how to keep them engaged and stay on the job. We spoke about the older generation that wants to stay on the job and is eligible for the job because they have a lot of experience and they can add a lot of value. They can do things maybe faster because they have been there, done that. And we have the newer generation who wants to experience life, not only work. And they could jump from one company to another every 2 years because that's the only way to make more money, if that is the motivator, right? So what have you seen with your employees' engagement, retention? Some companies like Google have billiards tables and foosball and other kind of entertainment to attract talent, maybe. Other companies do it differently. Kevin, what have you seen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I see a lot of people jumping jobs as well now, and I wouldn't say it's always for money either. I think the younger generation now, if they're not enjoying their job, they tend to look around and move a lot more frequently than older people in our workforce do. And what I find really interesting now is we do a monthly employee survey. Like every month, every single person gets a survey, and the people that are really comfortable and enjoying it and give the highest scores are the people we've hired in the last 3 to 4 years and are younger. They're really content with the way things are, because we overload them with training opportunities and mentorship programs and engagement programs, and they can make full use of it. But the people who have been here for much longer and maybe slightly older, they always, in the surveys, they're saying there's just too much. It's information overload. Just leave me alone. Let me do my job. Right. And we're seeing this definite split now in ages and time with the company. People who've only been here 2 or 3 years are much more comfortable than people who've been here 10 or 15 years. And it's really interesting to see. And I've been here almost 25 years as well, right? And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Sometimes I think there's too much. Sometimes I think it's really cool, all the opportunities we offer and the chances to move around within divisions and relocate around the world to try different things. I think it's pretty cool. But there's a definite difference in attitude and approach to how you work. And if you don't like it, you know what, I'm just going to go to another company and see how it is there. And it's not always about the money now, whereas I think my generation, I'd only really move if the money was better now, or it was a distinctly different opportunity that was going to stretch me. It's it's different approaches, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Thank you, Kevin. Jerry?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when we had periods of rapid growth, there was so many opportunities as we built out the teams, and there was opportunities for movement. And now that we're in a more conservative period, and say in our market, right, people have been in positions longer, and now they're looking, for the next challenge. And we do employee surveys. We do them twice a year, and we thought that was too much, So, but it's interesting. We're measured as managers by our our employee survey results. Would you leave the company even if you had an offer for higher pay, that kind of thing. So we're always looking at, how do you view your managers? So this is why the career development actions are so important right now, because money is only like the second rung up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's basic security and safety, then there's money, but then there's everything else. It's gratification, fulfillment, self-worth, ego at the top, right? And that's what we're focused on. We're focused on building career plans for every employee, starting at the high performers ready to move, or expandable beyond their role, all the way down the chain, and then making managers put them in place, right? That's another thing. It's discipline among my managers to actually give the opportunity to the employees to develop, right? Because you have to have that, you have to be enabled to develop, right? But it's creating career journeys, and we try to create a career journey even in the service team, right? Because there is such a wide scope of opportunities within service beyond field engineering, project managers, salespeople, so many different things. But also try to retain people in the company by saying, even if your desires lead you outside of service, we can help you. We don't put up walls. If I can help you transition to product management or engineering, let's set something up. Let's try to help you get there because it benefits the company. So we're really focused on that right now. I would say circling the wagons, but really trying to retain the people we have, looking to the future when we think that there'll be more movement coming.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
Paul?
Josh, I'm glad you brought up Maslow.
I use it in every HR conversation. That's it.
Well, yes. Although I do wonder whether when our HR colleagues are talking about Maslow, they really understand it. Because if you then put Maslow into a sales environment, and you just think about the process where we walk into a shop, and let's say we see a nice jacket that we think, wow, I really love that jacket. The first thing you do is you look at the price. So Maslow says it's down quite low on the list of our wants, yet our innate human being is that when we look at something, the first thing we look at is the price. And I know we could spend the next 2 years arguing about the difference between value and price, but it comes down to value. In an environment where we are in a global recession, we are seeing the rise of the decline of the Western dominance when it comes to manufacturing and industry. People feel as if they are struggling. They're struggling with the cost of living. They're struggling with the price of everything. They're seeing other organizations downsizing, as Charlie said earlier. Suddenly, money becomes terribly important because you think, if I don't have it, gosh, I've got a problem. So that's where value comes up higher on the chart. What gets fed back in career conversations. I mean, turning it to service in particular, I think the employee engagement surveys have a major problem with service, because I would reckon that 80% of all people employed in a service environment that have a toolkit only want one thing, which is to be left alone and go and fix things. That's why they joined the organization. Their ideal world would be to be left alone, given their car or their van or whatever is their thing. And that's exactly why, Jerry, you were saying earlier that, you've got university graduates, highly experienced, coming into the service environment and loving it, because they get this wonderful freedom, and they get the satisfaction from going, doing a great job, getting the customer say, oh, thanks very much, I'm really glad you fixed that. Because, and unlike everybody that's stuck in the office, they get to see the customer, whether it's a healthcare environment or an industry environment, the customer satisfaction. You go away with a spring in your step, because suddenly you've had someone pat you on the back and says, oh, thank goodness for that, because everybody sitting in finance or in HR or whatever, they don't get that opportunity. But this really comes down to value. And I still think we have a challenge within the industry of how we spin these engagement and then career development conversations for people who don't want to develop. I don't want to go on 15 more courses on these because I've done them before. What more can I do? And I've struggled when I'm speaking to, a 60-year-old engineer who's absolutely brilliant, who says, listen, Paul, seriously, all I want is to be an engineer. I don't want to become a manager. I don't want to go do anything else but this. And if you try and make me, I will leave. And you think, crikey, I don't want that. So it's really difficult. I think employee engagement is one of the most challenging aspects of any manager's role.
Agreed. And I think, as you mentioned, you have a whole spectrum. You have employees who tell you, I want to do this for the rest of my life. Just let me train me on new equipment so I'm up to date. And you have people who say, I want to move up 2-3 years. I want to have the opportunity to move up. So employee engagement surveys are necessary. They can give you an angle, but they don't tell the whole story. I think knowing the employee since the beginning, maybe in the hiring process, to understand their motivation and what they would like to have in their career, helps the manager really manage the team through the whole spectrum and be attentive to each person's requirements or needs for their retention, their engagement, and their advancement in their career, whether it is horizontal or vertical. What are your thoughts on that, Charlie?
I think we've kind of picked out a few interesting points, and yes, there are those engineers who just want to be left alone, and there are those engineers who want to progress through to management, whether or not it's the right thing for them, and for some it is and for some it isn't. I think that, to me, that boils down to the point of having the right makeup of your team. So you do want those who are just going to crack on, be happy, get on with their job, and you do want those who are pushing at development and wanting the next thing. I think the other thing for me that's important in terms of retention is making sure that your employees feel they have that sense of agency, so they're not just robots being sent to fix things and on to the next thing. And how you get that, but of course, as a business, we need that thing back up and running. We need that customer sorting out. We need that. But at the same time, how do you bake into your field service teams some kind of agency of, this is how I'm going to do it. This is, where's my choice? Where do I get to stamp my personality, stamp my own way of doing things? And of course, we're all from highly regulated industries. You have to curb some of that, but I think it's important for retention for people to feel as though there's something special about them that they bring to the role. So I think it's a complex thing. I'm aware we're kind of up for time, but I think there's more to explore on this.
Definitely, and I'm sure we'll have the chance on other roundtables to continue the discussion. So Kevin, Jerry, Paul, Charlie, thank you all for being here and for expressing your views openly. I'm sure that our audience will benefit from it. And to our audience, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please send us your questions and we'll be happy to answer, whether through DM or on future roundtables. Thanks again, gentlemen. Have wonderful days.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.